He had no phone, no shoes, and just $14. But one dream, to meet Lionel Messi. From a dusty village in Chad, a 12-year-old boy walked across 4 countries, carrying nothing but a backpack, a hand-drawn picture, and a cardboard sign that said, "Looking for Messi. I came from Chad." What happened when Messi saw it left the world speechless. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and like the video, and let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? Now let's jump into the story. In the dusty village of Duri, where the sun hangs low and hot like a stubborn lantern, a boy named Namil kicked a ball made of tied-up plastic bags. The ball barely bounced, but to him, it felt like magic. He was 12 years old, thin as a stick, and faster than most boys twice his age. His feet were bare, calloused from running across rocky ground. But if you asked him what he wanted in life, he wouldn't say food or shoes. He would whisper one name, like a prayer: Messi. Namil had never seen a real football match on television. Duri didn't have working electricity most days. There were no computers, no phones, no internet. But there was one thing that fueled his obsession: an old battery-powered radio, half broken, that belonged to a shopkeeper named Jabir. Jabir let Namil sit outside his store and listen when big matches were on. And each time the commentator shouted, "Messi," Namil smiled so wide it looked like his face could break. Messi was more than a player to him. He was a symbol of hope, of skill, of something beautiful in a world that often felt cracked and forgotten. Namil collected newspaper clippings whenever someone brought one in from the city. He had exactly 8 photos of Messi, carefully folded and kept in a plastic envelope, hidden under his pillow. He didn't have a jersey, so he took a piece of charcoal and wrote Messi 10 on the back of an old white shirt. The shirt had holes. The ink faded. But the dream never did. Every night Namil would lie on the roof of his home looking up at the stars, the hot air still buzzing with crickets, and he'd imagine himself in a stadium full of lights. In his mind, Messi was passing him the ball. In his mind, he was running across green fields, not brown dust. One evening, as the sky turned orange and the goats returned home bleeding, Namil told his cousin Fadil, "One day I'll meet him. I'll shake his hand." Fadil laughed so hard he nearly dropped his jug of water. "Meet Messi? You? From Duri?" But Namil didn't laugh. He just looked out toward the horizon. "Somehow," he said, "from that day forward, the teasing didn't stop." Kids called him the dreamer and joked that he'd ride a goat to Europe. Even some of the adults said he was wasting time. But Namil wasn't bothered. He had a quiet fire in him, and no amount of laughter could put it out. He began working small jobs after school. He carried buckets of water from the well for old women. He cleaned tools at a mechanic's shop. He swept the floor of a dusty cafe in the market. He even helped repair sandals using scraps of rubber. For every coin he earned, he kept half and gave the other to his mother. She didn't ask questions at first. She assumed he was just trying to help the family. But as the months passed, she noticed something. Her son had built a secret box under his bed, filled with coins, clippings, and a single drawing. Messi holding a trophy, sketched in pencil. One night, after dinner, she asked softly, "What are you saving for, Namil?" He looked at her and said, "A ticket to the world." She smiled, but she also felt a tightness in her chest. Mothers know when their children carry dreams bigger than the place they're born into. She didn't stop him. She only said, "Be wise, be safe, and never forget where you come from." Years passed and Namil never gave up. He grew taller, leaner, and his eyes stayed bright. Every birthday, he added something to his dream: a map, a word in French he learned from a traveling merchant, or a story from someone who once saw Europe. He studied accents by mimicking radio announcers. He drew maps in the sand. And he waited. On the morning of his 17th birthday, while the village roosters still crowed, Namil walked to the edge of the village road with a dusty backpack. Inside was one shirt, his drawing, and the money he'd saved for years. About $180 in worn notes and coins. His mother stood beside him, silent, holding back tears. She didn't tell him to stay. She only pressed a flat-folded scarf into his hands and said, "Keep this close. When you see him, tell him your name." Namil nodded. He hugged her, then Fadil, then began walking. Just like that. No ceremony. No goodbye speeches. Just footsteps down a dirt road, the morning light on his back, and a dream packed in a worn-out bag. As he disappeared down the path, an old man sitting by the well whispered to himself, "The dreamer walks. May the world listen." And just like that, Namil's journey had begun, not to fame, not to money, but to the heart of a boyhood promise and a man named Messi. The road from Duri was not a real road. It was more like a long trail of dust, broken stones, and silence. But to Namil it was the beginning of something bigger than anything he had ever known. He walked for hours that morning, his backpack bouncing lightly on his shoulders. Inside, it were only a few things. A change of clothes, a plastic-covered drawing of Messi, a bag of roasted peanuts, and the envelope of coins and bills he had saved over 4 years. His first stop was Abeche, a city 2 days away. He managed to hitch, a ride in the back of a delivery truck, crammed between crates of onions and plastic barrels. The driver, a heavy man with a kind face named Musa, asked where he was going. "Europe," Namil said, trying to sound braver than he felt. Musa laughed. "With that bag?" "With this dream," Namil replied. Musa nodded slowly. "Then May, your feet never grow tired." In Abeche, Namil bought a bus ticket with the little money he had. It took him to the border of Sudan, where he crossed on foot unnoticed along with other travelers. Some were trying to find work, others were running from war. Everyone had a reason. Namil's was folded in his pocket, a piece of paper that read in big letters, "Looking for Messi. I came from Chad." He had made it before leaving home using a black marker and a cardboard box. He carried it everywhere now, like a shield, like a flag. In Sudan, the heat hit harder. The cities were crowded and loud. Namil slept in small shelters under awnings and once in the corner of a bus station next to a sleeping dog. He washed his face in public fountains. He drank tea with strangers. One man gave him an old hat. Another, a woman selling bread, handed him 2 extra pieces for free after reading his sign. "Messi?" she said with a smile. "He is magic." Namil smiled too. "And I am trying to find the magic." From Sudan, he caught a cheap ride to Libya, paying half his savings for a seat in the back of a rusted van. The driver spoke little and frowned a lot. They drove through long stretches of desert, sometimes without stopping for hours. At night, the stars looked like they were breathing. In the silence of the dunes, Namil whispered to himself, "One more step, just one more." In Libya, he cleaned windshields at traffic lights to earn enough money for food. People stared at his sign. Some ignored him. Others gave him coins or asked questions. A tall man in a suit took a photo with him and posted it online, telling Namil, "Maybe the world will notice." He wasn't sure what that meant, but it felt like something good. A week later, a man named Hamed, who worked at a hostel, offered him a safe place to sleep for 2 nights. Hamed had once tried to reach Italy by boat but turned back after nearly drowning. "You sure you want this?" Hamed asked. "Yes," Namil said, "even if it's hard." Namil looked down at his shoes, dusty and torn. "It's already hard, but not harder than living with a dream I never chased." Hamed smiled and gave him leftover food and a small travel bag. "Then go, and don't stop." With Hamed's help, Namil bought a cheap plane ticket to Tunisia, using most of his money. It was the first time he had ever flown. His hands shook when the plane lifted into the sky. He looked down at the shrinking land and thought of his mother, her scarf and the way she said, "Tell him your name." In Tunisia, things became harder. He didn't speak the local dialect, and people didn't understand his sign. Still, he managed to catch a train heading toward Italy. A woman on the train saw his sign and gave him a sandwich. Football brings people together, she said in French. In Rome, the city looked like a dream. Large buildings, fast cars, glowing lights. But Namil was still just a boy with a backpack and a sign. He stood in busy plazas, holding it up, quietly. Most walked past. Some stopped and took photos. One family, a couple with 2 young boys, asked him about his journey. After hearing his story, they bought him a hot meal, gave him socks, and handed him a train ticket to Barcelona. "Maybe Messi is there," the father said. "Maybe fate wants you to find him." Namil didn't know what fate meant exactly, but the train ticket felt like a key in his hand. He arrived in Barcelona just as the sun was setting. The station was full of noise, languages he didn't understand, and lights so bright they made him squint. He found his way to Camp Nou, the stadium he had only seen in pictures from old newspapers. It was massive, like a mountain of concrete and dreams. But when he asked people around, they told him the truth. Messi no longer played there. He had moved to Paris to a club called PSG. Namil stood outside the gates of Camp Nou, holding his sign with both hands. The wind tugged at it gently, like even the world was whispering. Not yet. He had one shirt left, a single drawing, and now only $12 in his pocket. But when he looked at the stadium one last time, he didn't feel sad. He felt ready. Tomorrow, he would find the road to Paris, because the dream wasn't finished. Not yet. Barcelona had been a dream, but it wasn't the end. When Namil found out that Messi had moved to Paris, something inside him didn't break. It lit up. He didn't cry. He didn't get angry. He just smiled softly and whispered to himself, "The road is still going." But he had a problem. Only $12 remained in his pocket. His shoes had holes, his backpack was falling apart, and he was tired, bone-deep tired. But in his chest, where doubt usually lives, there was only hope. It wasn't loud or wild. It was quiet and steady, like a flame that refuses to go out. He knew getting to Paris would take everything he had left. That night, he slept on a bench near the station. He curled up under his bag, using his jacket as a pillow. He ate half a piece of bread from the train ride and drank water from a public fountain. The next morning, he took out his sign again. "Looking for Messi. I came from Chad." He stood on the corner, near a small shop where tourists passed. Most people just walked by. Some gave curious glances, but finally a man with a kind face stopped. "You're still looking?" he asked in French. Namil didn't understand all the words, but he nodded and pointed at the sign. The man introduced himself as Karim, a former football coach from Morocco now living in Spain. He read the sign, then looked into Namil's tired eyes and said, "You've come far. Too far to stop now." He took Namil to a cafe, bought him breakfast, and sat with him for over an hour. After hearing the full story, he made a few phone calls, and by the end of the day, he had arranged a bus ride to the French border. He even gave Namil a jacket for the cold and a few coins. "From one dreamer to another," Karim said, smiling. "Find him." Namil shook his hand tightly. "I will." The road into France was long and uncomfortable. The bus was crowded, packed, with people speaking different languages. Namil didn't understand most of it, but he didn't need to. He held the sign close and watched the trees pass by through the dusty window. He thought about home, his mother's scarf, and the promise he had made under the stars. He arrived in Paris just after sunset. The air was colder, and the city felt much louder than anything he'd known. He had no map, no guide, and only enough money for one ride on the metro. He used it wisely, asking people for directions to Parc des Princes, the stadium where Messi now played. Once he arrived, he stood outside its tall gates, wide-eyed. The place looked like it could touch the sky. People rushed past him, busy with their lives, but Namil stood still, holding his sign. He had made it. Not to Messi yet, but to the door. And now, he would wait. One day passed. He slept curled up near a side wall of the stadium, where a patch of concrete was dry and slightly hidden from the wind. A security guard saw him and handed him a bottle of water, saying nothing. 2 days passed. A woman selling snacks near the entrance, Zoe, gave him leftover bread at closing time. She didn't ask many questions. She just said, "You look like someone who believes." On the third night it rained. Nabil wrapped himself in the jacket Karim gave him, trying to stay dry. His drawing of Messi was safely sealed in a plastic sleeve. He looked up at the stadium and whispered, "I'm not leaving until I see you." By the fourth day, something changed. A black SUV pulled up near the stadium's private entrance. Fans nearby began to scream and rush forward with phones. Nabil stood too, holding up his sign with trembling hands. Cameras flashed, people shouted, and slowly, the window of the SUV rolled down. It was him. Messi, wearing a simple gray sweater, tired, eyes behind the glass but real. So real, the crowd screamed louder. But Messi wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Nabil. He had seen the sign. The car stopped completely. The window rolled down further. Messi leaned toward his security and said something. Then the door opened, and Lionel Messi stepped out. The noise from the crowd seemed to fade for a moment. Messi walked past the cameras, past the barriers, straight to where Nabil stood frozen. "You came from Chad?" Messi asked gently in Spanish. Nabil's voice cracked as he replied in broken English. "To see you." Messi stared at him, then slowly nodded. No cameras now. No noise. Just the two of them. "Then come in," Messi said softly, and reached out his hand. Nabil blinked, unsure if it was real. But when he felt Messi's hand take his own, warm and solid, he knew. It was all real. That day, inside the stadium, Nabil sat in a lounge holding a brand new PSG jersey signed in silver ink. His name was written across the back. He gave Messi his hand-drawn picture. They talked for half an hour with the help of a translator. Messi smiled a lot. Nabil smiled more. Before leaving, Messi gave him one more thing. A ticket. Front row. Tonight's match. That night, under the floodlights, Nabil sat closer to the pitch than he had ever imagined. He watched Messi run, pass, and finally, score. The crowd exploded with cheers, but Nabil didn't cheer. He just smiled. Because, for him, the real goal had already happened. The stadium lights glowed like stars come down to earth. The crowd roared, filling the night air with chants and cheers, but Nabil sat in silence. His eyes locked on the field. He wasn't trying to take photos or record videos like the others around him. He didn't even blink much. He just wanted to see, and there he was. Messi running across the green pitch, his movements smooth, sharp, and full of purpose. The very same man Nabil had drawn in the dirt back in Dury. The man he had followed across 4 countries. The man who had once felt like a dream. Now just meters away, alive and real. When Messi scored, the stadium erupted. Fans leapt to their feet. Some cried. Others waved flags. The ground shook with celebration. But Nabil didn't jump. He didn't scream. He simply smiled. Because the goal he had chased for years had already happened. Not on the field, but at the stadium gate. When Messi had reached out his hand and said, "Then come in." After the match, Messi looked toward the front row, searching. He spotted Nabil and waved. A small, simple wave, not to a fan, but to a friend. Nabil waved back. That one moment was quiet and short, but it meant more than any medal or trophy. Next day, Nabil's story began to spread. Someone had taken a photo of him with the sign. Then came videos. Reporters picked up the story. It made headlines. Boy walks across Africa to meet Messi. From Chad to Paris. 1 teens. Journey for a dream. Messi stops car after seeing handwritten sign. People across the world wanted to know more. News stations called it one of the most moving football stories in years. Social media exploded with support, love, and disbelief. Celebrities reposted the story. Athletes shared it. And in one interview, a reporter asked Messi, "Why did you stop for him?" Messi answered softly, He believed so much. I had to believe with him. Namil stayed in Paris for a few more days. PSG gave him a tour of the stadium. He got to meet the team. Some players signed his shirt. One even gave him a new pair of football boots. But more than anything, he carried home something invisible, the weight of a dream come true, and the quiet power of being seen. When he returned to Duri, the whole village was waiting. They had followed his story on borrowed phones and scratchy radios. Kids wore handmade Messi shirts. Elders smiled with pride. His mother, standing near the village gate, opened her arms without a word. Namil ran into them, and they held each other tightly, both crying softly. The people of Duri celebrated like they'd won a championship. They made music with old drums and cooking pots. They danced in the street. They painted a mural of Messi and Namil on the wall of the school, which still had no roof. In the weeks that followed, Namil didn't brag or boast. He didn't walk around like a hero. Instead, he returned to work, but with a new purpose. He started organizing small football games for the kids in the village. He made teams. He helped repair goals made of tree branches. He taught them how to dribble, how to pass, and most of all, how to dream. He shared his story not for praise, but for hope. He told the boys and girls, "You don't need everything, you just need to believe in something." One day a small boy asked, "Would you do it again, all of it?" Namil laughed, then answered seriously, "Yes, I would have gone twice as far." Years later, that same wall still stands in Duri, painted with bright colors. Beneath the mural, a new message was added, written in both Arabic and French. It reads, "Dreams don't ask for permission, they ask for courage." Visitors who pass through the village still ask about the boy who met Messi. Some leave donations, some bring footballs, but most of all, they leave with something else: belief. Because the story of Namil was never just about meeting a football star. It was about walking toward the unknown, step by step, with empty pockets and a full heart. It was about kindness, from strangers, from vendors, from people who didn't share his language but understood his hope. It was about a world that, despite its noise and borders, still makes room for miracles, and somewhere under the same stars he once dreamed beneath, Namil still looks up sometimes and whispers, "Thank you for stopping."